This slide summarizes a lot of the defects in the pathology of the thyroid. The vast majority of hypothyroidism is just a gland that's failed. It's usually burnt out, dead, post-Hashimoto's thyroiditis. The T4 is low, and the TSH in the thyroid releasing hormone is up. So the pituitary and the hypothalamus are yelling at the thyroid. When the pituitary is defective, which is rare, you'll have decrease in both the thyroid hormone, T4, and TSH is down. And the hypothalamus will be up because it's also sort of yelling at your pituitary. Now that's rare, but it can happen. Now, pituitary hyperthyroidism is also very rare because most problems in the pituitary are at the level of the gland itself, not in the pituitary or the hypothalamus. But when it is pituitary, then you see a high T4 and a high TSH is a pituitary adenoma. Most overfunctionings are Graves' disease or an autoimmune attack of the thyroid itself. Now, that means a high T4 and a low TSH, and that's the usual, that's the norm. Now, at first glance, this picture looks kind of complicated. All it's really saying is that if you don't have iodine, you can't make T4 and T3. Because T4 needs more iodines than T3, T4 is the first thing to go. And the T3 will remain normal for a while because there's less iodines on it. And all this means is that when you have a low T4 and a low T3, the T4 goes down first, and the TSH will go up out of the pituitary. Low iodine comes across like thyroid gland failure. Low iodine comes across like thyroid gland failure. That's all. And it means a high TSH and a low thyroid hormone. That's it. So what's the difference between that and hypothyroidism from burnt out Hashimoto's? And the answer is not very much, except that in one you can fix it by giving iodine, and the other you've got to give thyroid hormone. So burnt out Hashimoto's kills off the gland, and you have a high TSH and a decreased FT4 means free T4. Now, when you see a subclinical hypothyroidism, it's hard to know what that means. It really means that you have a high TSH and a low T4, but you don't feel it. And it's not clear how much that has to be treated. It kind of is like that it's impending gland failure. But you don't have to treat it if the person's asymptomatic. Now, what happens when you have hypothyroidism is you have a decreased metabolic rate, decreased oxygen consumption, because you don't have thyroid hormone. And because you're not using your substrates, cholesterol and lipids build up, and so does sugar. You have a high prolactin level because when your gland fails and your hypothalamus gets upset with you, the hypothalamus increases thyrotropin-releasing hormone. Thyrotropin-releasing hormone under pathologic conditions increases thyroid hormone. That's just in case you didn't get that the last 7 times I said it over the endocrine section. Oh, and there are sodium abnormalities. Now, there's a decreased free water clearance. Nobody really knows why it is that you have a decreased free water clearance in hypothyroidism, but you do. You don't clear free water as well in hypothyroidism. Not clear why, it just doesn't happen. But you retain more free water and it causes hyponatremia. And you get yellow skin and night blindness, again, for unclear reasons, not precise. Hypothyroidism, everything is slow. My brain is slow, my lethargic, I'm gaining weight, my deep tendon reflexes are slow, called hung reflexes, that they contract but they come down much slower. And you end up having decreased cardiac performance because it's cardiomyopathy, because you need thyroid hormone for normal cardiac function. You need thyroid hormone to make erythropoietin to have blast-forming and colony-forming units of red cells, and so therefore everybody with anemia can have anemia. The hypothyroidism can cause anemia, and because muscle contraction happens with thyroid hormone, if you don't have thyroid hormone, you're constipated. And you have hoarseness because the vocal cords thicken. The vocal cords become edematous. And since thyroid hormone makes you sweat, no thyroid hormone makes your skin dry. Since thyroid hormone makes you breathe faster, no thyroid hormone makes you breathe slower. Since no thyroid hormone, you breathe slower and you retain CO2. The mechanism of myxedema, which is tissue edema from hypothyroidism, is not clear, but we do know that myxedema coma happens when you simply have no thyroid hormone and you end up being unresponsive and you swell up and you need to get intravenous thyroid hormone. And hypothyroidism is easier to understand because everything is slow. You must have thyroid hormone for the production of neural tissue. If you don't have thyroid hormone by the time you are several months old, you will have permanent neurological damage. You're short, and also remember that you need thyroid hormone to release growth hormone. You need thyroid hormone to release growth hormone. So if you don't have thyroid hormone, you have dwarfism. You end up also having all sorts of neurological, irreversible neurological developmental delays, and that's cretinism. You have delayed growth because you need growth hormone, you need thyroid hormone for growth hormone, and you don't have puberty because without thyroid hormone, you don't have growth hormone. Without growth hormone, you cannot have a pubertal growth spurt. So consequently, no thyroid hormone, you're a short, brain-damaged, permanently prepubertal person. So panhypopituitarism can cause secondary hypothyroidism. Well, if you don't have a pituitary, you don't have TSH. How can you have a thyroid growing if you don't have TSH? And I can't stand these terms, secondary, tertiary. It drives me batshit crazy. Really, I don't understand what the point of this terminology is. Why can't we just say you can have it because either your pituitary fails, your thyroid fails, or your hypothalamus fails? And if you have it down, that any of them will cause a low free T4. Iodine deficiency is the same as a thyroid gland failure. You can't make thyroid hormone without iodine. And lithium also, interestingly, just displaces thyroid hormone, so it can't be produced. Lithium literally blocks the effect on the thyroid gland. Now, this term about Wolff-Chaikoff effect. I didn't escape from the Wolff-Chaikoff effect. Like, do you speak any language we can understand? The Wolff-Chaikoff effect is a $5 name for you took so much iodine it actually blocked up your gland. How can it be if iodine is used to make thyroid hormone? How can giving a lot of iodine block the thyroid hormone? It's like your toilet, right? Your toilet takes things, but if you give too much of it, it kind of stuffs it up, doesn't it? Yep. And resistance to thyroid hormone is virtually non-existent. Hypothyroidism treatment's very easy. You simply just give thyroid hormone, T4, and the higher you give, and it converts itself. The body will convert its own T4 to T3, and you use the TSH levels to tell you if you've given enough to people. You don't have to replace T3. T3 is not necessary because let the body regulate its own T3 production. Now, the problem with people in menopause and older people is that if you give too much thyroid hormone, you can actually cause worsening dissolution of bone. And that's why we go slow in two groups of people. Osteoporosis, yes, but the other one is people who have cardiac disease. See, if you have cardiac disease and I give you too much thyroid hormone, I not only increase the amount of work of your heart and increase oxygen consumption, I increase the demand of all your tissues. See, when I increase the demand of all of your tissues, Then the heart has to pump out more, and that ends up resulting in a massive cardiac hypoxia, doesn't it now? By your body needing more oxygen delivery than your heart can successfully put out. Graves' disease is antibodies attacking your thyroid, turning it on, and making hyperthyroidism. Graves' disease is also the only one of the hyperthyroidisms that is associated with eye and skin abnormalities. With eye and skin. Now, thyroid toxicosis is the same thing as saying severe hyperthyroidism. Graves' disease is simply the most common. It is an autoimmune disease with thyroid-stimulating antibodies or thyroperoxidase antibodies. And you have a high T4 leading to feedback inhibition on the thyroid gland, causing a low TSH. It's a high T4 causing feedback inhibition, causing low TSH. If you have a high T4 and a high TSH, that is a pituitary overproduction. That's a pituitary overproduction of TSH. But Graves' disease, silent thyroiditis, and subacute thyroiditis all lower the TSH because they have feedback inhibition on the pituitary. Other thing is people who exogenously abuse thyroid hormone also have a low TSH because it's feedback inhibition on the pituitary. Graves' disease is the only one that causes you to have an increased radioactive iodide uptake because it's a hyper-functioning gland. Silent thyroiditis and subacute thyroiditis are simply leaky glands, with silent also being called painless thyroiditis, and subacute thyroiditis is painful thyroiditis. All hyperthyroidism gives increased metabolic rate and heat production, not just Graves' disease. All hyperthyroidism gives you increased cardiac output. CO is cardiac output, increased contractility. HR is heart rate, palpitations and everything. This guy, you got to be careful when you're replacing thyroid hormone in people who have cardiac disease. You can rev those people up with cardiac disease into a myocardial infarction. So that's why you have to be careful on the replacement. You have weight loss because you're simply driving the car too fast and they're losing weight because they're consuming all the muscles as food. Isn't that interesting? And it causes a hyperexcitability leading to tremor and nervousness. Now, what do you treat essential tremor with? Beta blockers. So too much beta stimulation will give you a tremor because beta blockers decreases tremor. What's the difference between exophthalmos and proptosis? What's the difference between exophthalmos and proptosis? The answer is nothing. Untreated hyperthyroidism causes thyroid storm, which is simply the most life-threatening version of this. And end-stage Graves' disease can burn out. Thyroid storm gets treated with beta blockers to block the target, propylthiouracil and methimazole to block the production of the hormone, dexamethasone to block the peripheral conversion, and high-dose iodine to block the uptake of iodine in the gland. But propranolol works the fastest. So let's say that again. I'm on the serious hyperthyroidism. What works the fastest? Beta blockers. Also, it's one of the last uses of non-specific beta blockers. Beta blockers block the target. Beta blockers, methimazole and propylthiouracil block the production of the hormone. It blocks thyroid peroxidase. So you block the oxidation of the iodine. You block the organification onto tyrosine. You block the coupling so you don't make T3 and T4. Don't make monoiodotyrosine and diiodotyrosines. Blocks all of them. One drug blocks all of them. High-dose iodine creates a Wolff-Chaikoff effect, creates a blocking up of the iodine gland, and steroids block the peripheral conversion. And finally, let's ablate the gland. You only need surgery when you're pregnant or you're having airway obstruction. Pregnant and airway obstruction. Other than that, it's radioactive iodide kills off the gland. Here's a couple of miscellaneous things. Sometimes it's a thyroid adenoma making TSH. Rare, but can happen. Toxic multinodular goiter is kind of like saying little focal bits of Graves' disease. Subacute and silent thyroiditis, also known as painful and painless thyroiditis, are antibodies stripping the walls off the thyroid follicles so they just leak hormone, or TSH-producing adenomas, which are scanned and removed. You scan it, you remove it. Remember, adenomas that overfunction are all managed the same way. Removal. So here's our last slide, and goiter is to say, well, goiter doesn't mean you got hyperthyroidism or hypo. You could have goiter from high functioning. You could have goiter from low functioning. You can have goiter from iodine deficiency. You can have goiter from autoimmune. Goiter does not mean high, low, or normal function. It can be any one of those. Wish you well. I'll see you in the next section.